Okay, well, what brought me here? My life as a child was a lot of moving around, and so I never got fixed anywhere. Maybe along the coast of California was where I got fixed because I enjoyed surfing and things like that. But as I became a young adult, there was a war in Vietnam. And having studied the colonial process in the United States and also looked at what was going on in Vietnam in terms of colonialism or extractive colonialism, well, um, I decided to resist the draft and came to Canada. Um, I came here, I finished some of my school and got a job, began to raise a family. And one of my school chums introduced me to a gentleman who had a farm. He had just bought a farm. And I came down and I helped him with carpentry work and things like that. And he said, I think you would make a good neighbor. So if you want to buy part of the farm, I'll be glad to sell it to you. And I bought it. Um, I bought 50 acres for $50 an acre, if you can imagine that. What a great start for a young man with a young family. And well, um, you asked me something which is a long story. I'm trying to make it as short as possible. Um, so I built a house. I guess in a way I was a settler because it was really interesting. Um, the farm I bought, the one that my friend, the old guy who sold me my farm, uh, he bought it from people who had been settlers. And so, in a way, we became settlers. Um, and their monuments were out in the back fields, huge piles of stone that they had worked to remove from the fields. And but their culture died. Their culture was bypassed, and their kids were dispersed. And so nothing was left of it. Really, a little bit was left. I worked with a lot of these guys in the bush as a young man too, and their culture was dying. I used to joke that we were using the stones that they had piled up in their big monuments for our sweat lodges. I don't joke about that anymore because I really do respect the kind of hard work that human beings put into trying to live on the land. Anyway, um, one day Harold Perry, who was from Ardoch, came to my house and asked me if I would help him out with something. Um, he His family had been responsible for bringing the wild rice to Ardoch and planting it there generations ago. And he was still sort of the person who looked after it. His father had, his grandmother had, and but there was a commercial harvester who wanted the wild rice, and the province had given the rice to the commercial harvester because there was profit in it rather than culture. And Harold wanted to preserve the culture of the wild rice. People came from Alderville, from Curve Lake, various places where other Anishinaabe people were to come and harvest at Ardoch with the families that were there. And so um, I started doing some research with Harold. We prepared a legal case and we fought the first sort of legal dispute about wild rice in the province back in the 1970s. And a long story short, I spent most of my adult life in the Ardoch Algonquin First Nation in one way or another. First as a researcher and Harold's sort of confidant, and Harold taught me a whole lot. In fact, I would have been a very different person had I not met Harold Perry. No doubt about that. Um, Sometime along the line, Harold would suggest, we should adopt you into our band. And I said, well, not, thank you very much, but I'm quite content with who I am. My mother was a Cherokee woman, Taught me a lot as a child as well, sent me to cultural school, so I learned a lot. Um, but that wasn't Algonquin. And so eventually, Harold had asked me 5 or 6 times. And at that point, I felt it was a dishonor to him to say no again. And so one summer at the gathering at the Charlotte Lake Beach with the community present, Harold went through the adoption process. Um, that's a long story, as short as I can make it.
So, what can I say? It would be really good for the people who are watching this to learn more about Algonquin culture, basically, and what elements of the culture drew you to it, and why you think it should be saved as much as possible.
Well, Anishinaabe means human being. Um, and I'm an in-betweener. I'm a mixed blood person, um, but I'm a human being. And the ethics of Anishinaabe culture spoke to me loud and clear as, here I am in this territory. Here I am in a territory that gave birth to, created, was the matrix in which the Algonquin culture developed. And so if I'm going to live in this territory, I have to know something about how the culture is developed through the ecology, through the territory. And if I'm going to live well, I should probably follow those ethics as closely as possible. And having the absolute privilege of knowing so many of the elders who have, and many of them have now passed away. Um, that were willing to talk and teach and just befriend me. And so, did I appropriate that culture? Uh, I suppose yes. Did I adopt it? Has it adopted me? I would say yes too. Um, but have I benefited my life? I can't imagine my life being any different than it has been. And making the commitments and doing the work that I have has been really good.
Yeah. So, I'm wondering if you can tell us about the political problems, like, that thing that blew me away about the land, the treaty, and then the province being the forestry and cutting down all the trees. If you can go into that story a little
Yeah,
bit, because that's so shocking.
yeah. Um, this 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 area where I live today does mean a lot to me. Um, I discovered through my son's genealogical work that we actually had a Dutch ancestor that lived very close to here back in 1828
Mm-hmm.
and stayed here for a dozen years or so, and then moved on. And that's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is not too far from here is the first Algonquin Reserve, and it was set up on the shores of Bob's Lake at the eastern end of Bob's Lake, and it was set up by a man by the name of Shawana Penesu, which means southern bird, if we're going to translate it. Um, and he had fought in the War of 1812. He'd been a soldier on the side of the British during the War of 1812, and he was recognized as a leader among his people. And he stayed the winter not too far from here, probably raised here as a child. And when traffic on the Rideau River became really precarious for Indian people because there was so much settlement going on in the 1840s, 1830s, 1840s, he he tried to establish a settlement here, and he asked for a reserve of land to be set aside for about 90 people. They called them 90 souls in the records.
Mm.
Um, And he he was granted that land after petitioning, 2,000 acres. That would be the first reserve in 1842 set aside for Algonquins anywhere. And but the officials in Bytown also gave the permit for logging to someone else. And so a man by the name of Flint came up and began to log off the area, which created a tremendous amount of conflict for the Algonquins and for Shawanoe-Penesi's people. This is the height of land. And in order to escape development, Aboriginal people everywhere in Canada had to head for the height of land because it was the last to be developed. And so it was sort of the last sort of uh, land base that they could have ever achieved at that particular time. And so that conflict resulted in a lot of assaults. Shawanoe-Penesi wrote to the province and said, you gave us a land to be protected. Will you come and protect it? And the answer he got back from the bureaucrats was, we gave you a license of protection for that land, but we gave the license for the trees to someone else.
It's so unbelievably horrible. And how did people react and feel when that happened?
Well, Shawanoe-Penesi wrote to the commander in Perth, because Perth was still a military garrison town, and he asked for the military to come and protect his people from the women from rape and the men from being assaulted. And the answer he got back, which was interesting because he knew the commander in Perth. He had fought under him in the War of 1812. They knew each other by recognition and by name. And the commander wrote back and simply said, it's not in our interest to protect Indians. However, if you harm the loggers, we will have to come and protect them. So, friendly advice. And probably meant as friendly advice, but not the kind of help that Shawanoe-Penesi wanted or needed.
So that was the first treaty with Algonquin people?
Well, it wasn't a treaty. It was a grant of land.
Oh, okay.
And what happened when the trees were taken, agriculturalists, farmers, settlers moved in and began to use the land that had been cleared, and Shawanoe-Penesi and his group simply had to pick up and leave. Many went to what we know as Maberly now, which is on the Fall River, and up to Ardoch. Some went up to Ardoch to join other families there because that was still a height of land and a protected place where people hadn't settled.
Yeah, so how come there weren't treaties with Algonquin people as there were with other kind of farming indigenous cultures?
Yeah. The Algonquins did not necessarily end up with treaties because settlement took place too fast. This was really a period from about 1800 to Confederation. And this was a period when it's really hard to imagine the amount of immigration that was taking place. And when you think about European history, this was a period of tremendous ups and downs in the economy, and was simply flushing the streets of the big cities in Europe into North America. And so people were coming here from Ireland, from Scotland, from England, and other places in Europe as well. So lots of people, there was Polish immigrants as well in this area. So, it was a free-for-all.
So was there, because I somehow thought that because some indigenous groups were farmers, that maybe it seemed they made treaties with them because they thought of them as being, as actually living on the land, and they wouldn't think of Algonquin people who are hunter-gatherers as actually living on the land because they'd move from summer to winter um, places to live.
Right. The common folks who came here to settle basically did not understand the indigenous culture of the Aboriginal people. Um, they themselves, for generations, had been caught up moving from the feudal system into the emerging capitalist system. So once they were tenured to land, and they probably had some recollection of that, uh, uh, but they also had become itinerant farmers who didn't own land, who could be kicked off the land easily by the law. Um, and it was also a time of significant political changes. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 had laid out that only the government, only the crown, could treaty for land, that only the crown could separate the ownership of indigenous land from the Aboriginal people themselves. And so the settlers had no stake in that, except that their stake was to acquire land and to make a living themselves. And so every opportunity that they could find to exclude Indian people from employment, to exclude them from use of land, they took advantage of. Um, yeah, these are the ethics of colonialism. One group being used against another in order to facilitate the economic development of the wealthy or controlling class. And
That's right. That's what I think too.
yeah,
Yeah, okay. So moving forward to today and the various groups of Algonquin people, and I don't know how comfortable you are feeling about like the somewhat antagonism between the Golden Lake people and the,
hmm
RDOT people and those with status cards and those
yeah,
without and all of that, if you're okay with that.
yeah, yeah. I can answer that quite simply, and that's coming off of the last question. Um, the Algonquins today are sort of caught in the same sort of bind that the uh, English, Irish, Scottish settlers and the Aboriginal and the Algonquins of the 1840s were caught in, and that is that whether you're status or non-status, whether you're mixed blood or more closer to the genetics of the traditional Algonquins, um, there are disagreements that are largely based upon identity politics. And the identity politics are largely fueled by the policies of the government, which recognizes that some people can hunt without a provincial license and other people cannot. It recognizes that some Algonquin people have privileges under the Indian Act and others do not. And that the government keeps these policies in place because it literally divides the Algonquin nation or the Algonquin communities.
So, what is your recommendation, are your recommendations for going forward in terms both of the actions of the government and the actions of the Algonquin people?
Well, the complications of the modern era, the one that we're in right now, um, become exacerbated on a daily basis. Um, the colonial enterprise is beginning to fail. The capitalist system is beginning to find that it lives in a finite world and that exponential growth is not possible. Um, we will reach peak. We have reached peak oil, but we'll reach peak resources really within the next 15 to 20 years. Now, Algonquins lived in a world in which they could have produced a tremendous amount of surplus. They lived in a world that, you know, produced tremendous amount of ability to live well and to develop a vibrant culture. However, we're not in that environment now. That environment has been manipulated by the capitalist system and the colonial system to the point almost of exhaustion. And not only that, we have something like 50 times the population living on the same lands as there were 100 years ago or more. These are problems that really complicate the present and the future. What we can do, excuse me, what we can do as Algonquins is we need to remember our own ethics about the land. We need to, and I see this very often. Often Algonquin leaders are playing catch up. They're playing 1950s or 1950s or 1960s rules about the economy when they should be looking at the present and the future. And this is really, really problematic because when we're talking about land acquisition through treaty, those treaties are fulfilling dreams that really belong to yesterday. We need to really look very, very closely at how our children and our grandchildren and on are going to survive and what we can do now to help that. We can't do everything. This generation is fighting a tremendous battle to even understand the situation we're in. We can't do everything, but what we can do is begin the process of looking at today and tomorrow as what we can have some influence over.
Wonderful. So, okay, last little bit about what are your feelings about truth and reconciliation, and what can non-Indigenous people do?
Well, truth and reconciliation. I've written about this. It's clearly a colonial term, and it's one that I think that most citizens can relate to on a really surface level. Truth existed before words. Words are the puppets of truth. Words are what we use to disguise ourselves, and so it's really hard to look at that term truth being used in the way that it is. Reconciliation is another word that's really difficult. If I know you and you know me, then there's a chance for reconciliation. But if we don't know each other, we can maybe agree to a treaty or an agreement, or we can all agree to live under the rule of law. Well, we know where that's going. But if we know each other, then there's some chance of reconciliation. And so that's what we need to do. And the fact is that I may be an adopted Anishinaabe. I may have Cherokee ancestry. I also have Dutch ancestry and English ancestry. I'm really an in-between person. I have to call myself a human being. I can't claim any one of those. So I just want to meet other people on that basis of being human beings. And yeah, we all differ from different ways. I have a different spirituality than someone else might, but there's only one creator. There's only one creation. You know, this creation wasn't created by multiple beings. It's a unity. And so, you know, maybe if we learn from looking at the world around us and how it's unified, maybe we can learn to live in some sort of unity as well.
Wonderful.
Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, that was a lot.
That's just the way I feel.